Well, today, everybody, will look at Matthew chapter 6 from verse 25 to 34, arguably one of the better known parts of the Sermon on the Mount. But I would also have to say, arguably the least obeyed part. It relates, of course, to worry or anxiety. You can read the verses on the screen there, but they go on to speak about the birds being fed by our Heavenly Father and flowers being clothed by Him. Therefore, do not be anxious. And let me say, anxiety and worry is a huge subject. It's actually not something that we can adequately cover in a short devotion like this morning. All these verses actually can't even be covered either, but no doubt these verses would be used when broaching the subject of worry, of anxiety. And while we do need to speak about that, we actually must remember the context of these verses. They're really speaking about worry in the context of what we seek after. So in verse 31 to 32, we read there on the screen there, Jesus is saying the world worries about these things. Don't be anxious saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink? For the Gentiles seek after these things. Jesus is saying the world worries about these things because that's what they seek after. But you and me, we are Christians, we are not to worry because we are in fact not to seek after these things. These things are not to be first in our lives. They're not to be a primary concern or motivation and goal. And so what I actually want to do with this passage today is see it and consider it through the lens of what is our primary focus in life? What are our main concerns? What are our primary motivations and pursuits? What are we seeking after? So not just about what worries us. But let me say, just as a bit of an aside in regards to worry, do we believe worry is a sin? Jesus commands us here not to worry. So that being true, we have to say, yes, it is a sin. But do you see it that way? As a Christian, do you think worry is a sin? Do you deal with worry in your lives in such a way as to put it to death? Do you daily pray for forgiveness for your worry? I think some of us would do well to take time actually and stop here and consider these things first. Because I fear that many Christians categorise worry as a minor sin, if they even categorise it as sin at all, and then minimise it. And so can therefore justify it. Compared with other things that you could be saying or doing, it's far less worse and therefore nothing to worry about. We cohabit then with this sin. We deal with it as if it's okay, normal, respectable. And because worry is something that just affects me primarily, doesn't affect anyone else, doesn't do any harm then, does it? And so we minimise it. Rather, actually in verse 30, Jesus says to those who worry, he addresses them as being those of little faith. So far from being something that we should not be concerned about or look over, we've got to consider and think about worry quite seriously. And so I said, what I really want to deal with today is more about what we're seeking in life. That's what the passage gets us to think about. I want us more to think about the root of our worry rather than strategies for dealing with worry. I want to start with the first word of the passage. The word is therefore. You've heard it many times before, I'm sure. This is a link to what has come before in the passage. What is it there for? What's the therefore there for? So think about it. How does Jesus saying, do not worry, have anything to do with laying up treasure in heaven? That's what Jesus is saying here. Therefore, do not worry. Based on what? And so that's what I want to work at first. That's what I want us to think about first. Jesus has gotten us to think about what treasure we want, heavenly or earthly treasure. He's asked us to think about the condition of our eyes, whether it is full of light, darkness, and gotten us to think about who we're going to serve, ourselves or God. And the choices we make, and as Christians, we've made the choices for heavenly treasure, for light, and for God. When we've made these choices, therefore, this is how we should behave. We do not worry. So basically, once we've decided who we're going to choose as our master, that's going to affect our attitude towards the one we've not chosen. We should not be anxious about earthly things if we've chosen heavenly things. We should not be anxious about our lives and our bodies if, in fact, we're not living to serve ourselves, but rather living to serve God. Here's something I think is very important. I think worry reveals our hearts. It reveals the desire and ambitions of our hearts. It often reveals people's motivation in life, why they act the way they do. So, for example, if we're worried about what people think about us, that shows that our desire, our ambition is for the praise of men and women or to be well thought of. If that's what we're worrying about, our actions then are going to be in line with our motivation. What we wear, how we look, the things we say and do will be said and done and worn and eaten and so on in order to get praise from men, because that's our primary desire, our ambition, our motivation. We see that throughout the rest of chapter 6 that we've already read. The hypocrites pray in public to be heard. They fast in such a way as to be seen. Their motivation is for themselves and to serve themselves. So their motivations drive their actions, and it's also then, no doubt, what would worry and concern them most of all. This is a really important thing to think about. The root of our worry. So let me challenge you to consider what it is you might worry about today. And why then you're worrying about it. What does it reveal about you? I found myself trying to just think a little bit more though. What is worry? Why do we worry? And on the screen you can see the second point there. I think we worry about things that either might happen that we don't want to happen, or we worry about things that might not happen that we do want to happen. So I want to encourage you again, if you worry at all today, what are you worrying for? Think about what you're worrying for. Is it something you don't want to happen, or something you do want to happen? And then you need to ask and consider whether this reveals a lack of trust in God. Now, some of you might have concern over what would be quite legitimate, maybe the salvation of your children and friends, but we're not to worry about that. If that's what your heart is revealed as being worried about, then it actually shows that your primary concern is for God and for the expansion of His kingdom. But it shows that we're not dealing with it in the right way. We're not to be worried. Rather, we're to pray, to give it to God, and to trust Him with the answer. So the root of worry is really key, really important for us today. Jesus also says, don't worry about these things. Now, I want you to understand and know, Jesus is not saying your body doesn't matter, nor your lives. Don't worry about any of these things. He says we're not to worry about them, but he's not saying that there's any concern whatsoever about them. Because he has made us. And he says he will care for us. But he's saying these material comforts of our life are not to be our main concern, our primary desire. They're not to be our fixation or preoccupation. To live a life that worries about these things is to live a life unworthily, actually. And by that I mean, if we are preoccupied and worried by the things of our life, our bodies, then it suggests that that's what life is all about. That we've got to make the most of our life while we're here on earth because this is all we have. Let's live and eat and drink and relax and go on holiday and be entertained. But we know the verse, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, well then, let's eat, drink and merry, for tomorrow we die. So it would be legitimate to worry about our body and our lives and all these things, but we know that Jesus did rise from the dead, so we are not worried about these things. We cannot think this way. Rather, we're told we're to seek first God's kingdom and His righteousness. Jesus must be our first priority. We live for Him, not us. We mustn't be distracted by the things of the world. Like the seed sown in thorns, we're not to be choked by the cares of this world. We're to seek first God's kingdom, its expansion and its proclamation throughout the world. Seek first righteousness, that's Jesus' righteousness to us, and to live then righteous lives here on earth. And when our dominant ambition and concern is God's kingdom and righteousness, then all these other things, should God give them to us, they will not be an end in themselves. They will not be what we desire. They will not be a distraction. They will not choke us out. but rather they can be used for the sake of God's kingdom and righteousness. They will be for the glory of God. And that, of course, is to be our primary concern and duty in life. That is what we're to seek.